Chapter 2, The Internal Prosperity in the Age of the Antonines, Part 3, Domestic Peace and Union were the natural consequences of the moderate and comprehensive policy embraced by the Romans. If we turn our eyes towards the monarchies of Asia, we shall behold despotism in the center and weakness in the extremities, the collection of the revenue or the administration of justice enforced by the presence of an army, hostile barbarians established in the heart of the country, hereditary satraps usurping the dominion of the provinces, and subjects inclined to rebellion, though incapable of freedom. But the obedience of the Roman world was uniform, voluntary, and permanent. The vanquished nations, blended into one great people, resigned the hope, nay, even the wish, of resuming their independence, and scarcely considered their own existence as distinct from the existence of Rome. The established authority of the emperors pervaded without an effort the wide extent of their dominions, and was exercised with the same facility on the banks of the Thames or of the Nile as on those of the Tiber. The legions were destined to serve against the public enemy, and the civil magistrates seldom required the aid of a military force. 63. In this state of general security, the leisure, as well as opulence, both of the prince and people, were devoted to improve and to adorn the Roman Empire. 63. Return ne Joseph. Tubel, Judaico, Lii. c. 16. The oration of Agrippa, or rather of the historian, is a fine picture of the Roman Empire. Among the innumerable monuments of architecture constructed by the Romans, how many have escaped the notice of history, how few have resisted the ravages of time and barbarism. And yet even the majestic ruins that are still scattered over Italy and the provinces would be sufficient to prove that those countries were once the seat of a polite and powerful empire. Their greatness alone or their beauty might deserve our attention, but they are rendered more interesting by two important circumstances which connect the agreeable history of the arts with the more useful history of human manners. Many of those works were a demand both of men and money. Augustus was accustomed to boast that he had found his capital of brick and that he had left it of marble. 64. The strict economy of Vespasian was the source of his magnificence. The works of Trajan bear the stamp of his genius. The public monuments with which Hadrian adorned every province of the empire were executed not only by his orders, but under his immediate inspection. He was himself an artist, and he loved the arts, as they conduced to the glory of the monarch. They were encouraged by the Antonines as they contributed to the happiness of the people. But if the emperors were the first, they were not the only architects of their dominions. Their example was universally imitated by their principal subjects, who were not afraid of declaring to the world that they had spirit to conceive and wealth to accomplish the noblest undertakings. Scarcely had the proud structure of the Colosseum been dedicated at Rome before the edifices, of a smaller scale indeed, but of the same design and materials, were erected for the use and at the expense of the cities of Capua and Verona. 65. The inscription of the stupendous bridge of Alcantara attests that it was thrown over the Tagus by the contribution of a few Lusitanian communities. When Pliny was entrusted with the government of Bithynia and Pontus, provinces by no means the richest or most considerable of the empire, he found the cities within his jurisdiction striving with each other in every useful and ornamental work that might deserve the curiosity of strangers or the gratitude of their citizens. It was the duty of the proconsul to supply their deficiencies, to direct their taste, and sometimes to moderate their emulation. 66. The opulent senators of Rome and the provinces esteemed it an honor and almost an obligation to adorn the splendor of their age and country, and the influence of fashion very frequently supplied the want of taste or generosity. Among a crowd of these private benefactors, we may select Herodotus Atticus, an Athenian citizen who lived in the age of the Antonines. Whatever might be the motive of his conduct, his magnificence would have been worthy of the greatest kings. 64. Return. Sweeten. In August. c. 28. Augustus built in Rome the temple and forum of Mars the Avenger, the temple of Jupiter, Tonans in the capital, that of Apollo Palatine, with public libraries, the portico and basilica of Caius and Lucius, the porticos of Livia and Octavia, and the theatre of Marcellus. The example of the sovereign was imitated by his ministers and generals, and his friend Agrippa left behind him the immortal monument of the Pantheon. 65 Return, Sima Fi, Veroni Illustrata, LIV. p. 68, 66. Return. Footnote 66. See the Xth book of Pliny's Epistles. He mentions the following works carried on at the expense of the cities. At Nicomedia, a new forum, an aqueduct, and a canal, left unfinished by a king. At Nice, a gymnasium and a theatre, which had already cost near £90,000, baths at Prusa and Claudiopolis, and an aqueduct of 16 miles in length for the use of Sinope. The family of Herod, at least after it had been favored by fortune, was lineally descended from Cimon and Miltiades, Theseus and Cecrops, Iacchus and Jupiter. But the posterity of so many gods and heroes was fallen into the most abject state. His grandfather had suffered by the hands of justice, and Julius Atticus, his father, must have ended his life in poverty and contempt had he not discovered an immense treasure buried under an old house, the last remains of his patrimony. According to the rigor of the law, the emperor might have asserted his claim, and the prudent Atticus prevented by a frank confession the officiousness of informers. But the equitable Nerva, who then filled the throne, refused to accept any part of it, and commanded him to use without scruple the present of fortune. The cautious Athenian still insisted that the treasure was too considerable for a subject, and that he knew not how to use it. "Abuse it then," replied the monarch with a good-natured peevishness, "for it is your own." 67. Many will be of opinion that Atticus literally obeyed the emperor's last instructions, since he expended the greatest part of his fortune, which was much increased by an advantageous marriage, in the service of the public. He had obtained for his son Herod the prefecture of the free cities of Asia, and the young magistrate, observing that the town of Troas was indifferently supplied with water, obtained from the munificence of Hadrian 300 myriads of drachms, about £100,000, for the construction of a new aqueduct. But in the execution of the work, the charge amounted to more than double the estimate, and the officers of the revenue began to murmur till the generous Atticus silenced their complaints by requesting that he might be permitted to take upon himself the whole additional expense. 68-67 Return. Hadrian afterwards made a very equitable regulation which divided all treasure trove between the right of property and that of discovery. Hist. August. Fee 9. 68 Return. Philostrat. In Viti. Sophist. Lii. p. 54-8. The ablest preceptors of Greece and Asia had been invited by liberal rewards to direct the education of young Herod. Their pupil soon became a celebrated orator, according to the useless rhetoric of that age, which, confining itself to the schools, disdained to visit either the Forum or the Senate. He was honored with the consulship at Rome, but the greatest part of his life was spent in a philosophic retirement at Athens, and his adjacent villas perpetually surrounded by sophists who acknowledged without reluctance the superiority of a rich and generous rival. 69. The monuments of his genius have perished. Some considerable ruins still preserve the fame of his taste and munificence. Modern travelers have measured the remains of the stadium which he constructed at Athens. It was 600 feet in length, built entirely of white marble, capable of admitting the whole body of the people, and finished in 4 years, whilst Herod was president of the Athenian Games. To the memory of his wife Regilla he dedicated a theatre, scarcely to be paralleled in the empire. No wood except cedar, very curiously carved, was employed in any part of the building. The Odeum, 691, designed by Pericles for musical performances, and the rehearsal of new tragedies, had been a trophy of the victory of the arts over barbaric greatness, as the timbers employed in the construction consisted chiefly of the masts of the Persian vessels. Notwithstanding the repairs bestowed on that ancient edifice by a king of Cappadocia, it was again fallen to decay. Herod restored its ancient beauty and magnificence. Nor was the liberality of that illustrious citizen confined to the walls of Athens. The most splendid ornaments bestowed on the temple of Neptune in the Isthmus, a theatre at Corinth, a stadium at Delphi, a bath at Thermopylae, and an aqueduct at Canusium in Italy, were insufficient to exhaust his treasures. The people of Epirus, Thessaly, Euboea, Boeotia, and Peloponnesus experienced his favors, and many inscriptions of the cities of Greece and Asia gratefully style Herodes Atticus their patron and benefactor. 7069, he returned. Iulus, Gellius, in Noct. I2, X2, XVI, 10, Zix1, Phil Ostrat, p. 564, 691 return. The Odium served for the rehearsal of new comedies as well as tragedies. They were read or repeated before representation, without music or decorations, and c. No piece could be represented in the theatre if it had not been previously approved by judges for this purpose. The king of Cappadocia who restored the Odium, which had been burnt by Scylla, was Araubarzanes. See Martini, Dissertation on the Odeons of the Ancients, Leipzig, 1767, p. 1, W70, Chapter 991. W70 I return, see Philistrat, LII, p. 548, 5060. Pausanias, LI, and VI. Temppadocia, who I-71 previous, Chapter 970. The Life of Herodes in the XX volume of the Memoirs of the Academy of Inscriptions. In the commonwealths of Athens and Rome, the modest simplicity of private houses announced the equal condition of freedom, whilst the sovereignty of the people was represented in the majestic edifices designed to the public use. 71. Nor was this republican spirit totally extinguished by the introduction of wealth and monarchy. It was in works of national honor and benefit that the most virtuous of the emperors affected to display their magnificence. The golden palace of Nero excited a just indignation, but the vast extent of ground which had been usurped by his selfish luxury was more nobly filled under the succeeding reigns by the Colosseum, the baths of Titus, the Claudian portico, and the temples dedicated to the goddess of peace and to the genius of Rome. 72. These monuments of architecture, the property of the Roman people, were adorned with the most beautiful productions of Grecian painting and sculpture, and in the Temple of Peace, a very curious library was open to the curiosity of the learned. 721. At a small distance from thence was situated the Forum of Trajan. It was surrounded by a lofty portico in the form of a quadrangle, into which 4 triumphal arches opened a noble and spacious entrance. In the center arose a column of marble, whose height of 110 feet denoted the elevation of the hill that had been cut away. This column, which still subsists in its ancient beauty, exhibited an exact representation of the Dacian victories of its founder. The veteran soldier contemplated the story of his own campaigns, and by an easy illusion of national vanity, the peaceful citizen associated himself to the honors of the triumph. All the other quarters of the capital, and all the provinces of the empire, were embellished by the same liberal spirit of public magnificence, and were filled with amphitheatres, theatres, temples, porticos, triumphal arches, baths, and aqueducts, all variously conducive to the health, the devotion, and the pleasures of the meanest citizen. The last mentioned of those edifices deserve our peculiar attention. The boldness of the enterprise, the solidity of the execution, and the uses to which they were subservient, rank the aqueducts among the noblest monuments of Roman genius and power. The aqueducts of the capital claim a just preeminence, but the curious traveller who, without the light of history, should examine those of Spoleto, of Metz, or of Segovia, would very naturally conclude that those provincial towns had formerly been the residence of some potent monarch. The solitudes of Asia and Africa were once covered with flourishing cities, whose populousness, and even whose existence, was derived from such artificial supplies of a perennial stream of fresh water. 73, 71 return. It is particularly remarked of Athens by Dicarchus de Statu Gracia, p. 8, Inter Geographos Minores, edit. Hudson, de 72, Return Donatus de Roma Vetere, Lel.ii. C. 4, 5, 6, Nardini Roma Antica, L.ii. 11, 12, 13, and a Ms. Description of Ancient Rome by Bernardus Auricellarius or Rucellai, of which I obtained a copy from the library of the Canon Riccardi at Florence. 2 celebrated pictures of Timanthes and of Protogenes are mentioned by Pliny, as in the Temple of Peace, and the Laocoon was found in the baths of Titus. The 721 return. The Emperor Vespasian, who had caused the Temple of Peace to be built, transported to it the greatest part of the pictures, statues, and other works of art which had escaped the civil tumults. It was there that every day the artists and the learned of Rome assembled, and it is on the site of this temple that a multitude of antiques have been dug up. See notes of Riemar on Dion Cassius, LXVE, C15p, 1083, Return Montfaucon, L'Antiquité expliquée, Tom. EVP2, LI, C9. Fabretti has composed a very learned treatise on the aqueducts of Rome. We have computed the inhabitants and contemplated the public works of the Roman Empire. The observation of the number and greatness of its cities will serve to confirm the former and to multiply the latter. It may not be unpleasing to collect a few scattered instances relative to that subject, without forgetting, however, that from the vanity of nations and the poverty of language, the vague appellation of city has been indifferently bestowed on Rome and upon Laurentum. Ancient Italy is said to have contained 1197 cities, and for whatsoever era of antiquity the expression might be intended, 74, there is not any reason to believe the country less populous in the age of the Antonines than in that of Romulus. The petty states of Latium were contained within the metropolis of the empire, by whose superior influence they had been attracted. 741. Those parts of Italy which have so long languished under the lazy tyranny of priests and viceroys had been afflicted only by the more tolerable calamities of war, and the first symptoms of decay which they experienced were amply compensated by the rapid improvements of the Cisalpine Gaul. The splendor of Verona may be traced in its remains, yet Verona was less celebrated than Aquileia or Padua, Milan or Ravenna. In T, the spirit of improvement had passed the Alps and been felt even in the woods of Britain, which were gradually cleared away to open a free space for convenient and elegant habitations. York was the seat of government, London was already enriched by commerce, and Bath was celebrated for the salutary effects of its medicinal waters. Gaul could boast of her 1200 cities, 75, and though in the northern parts many of them, without excepting Paris itself, were little more than the rude and imperfect townships of a rising people, the southern provinces imitated the wealth and elegance of Italy. 76. Many were the cities of Gaul, Marseille, Arles, Nismes, Narbonne, Toulouse, Autun, Vienna, Lyons, Langres, and Treves, whose ancient condition might sustain an equal and perhaps advantageous comparison with their present state. With regard to Spain, that country flourished as a province and has declined as a kingdom. Exhausted by the abuse of her strength, by America, and by superstition, her pride might possibly be confounded if we required such a list of 360 cities as Pliny has exhibited under the reign of Vespasian, 773. 300 African cities had once acknowledged the authority of Carthage, 78. Nor is it likely that their numbers diminished under the administration of the emperors. Carthage itself rose with new splendor from its ashes, and that capital, as well as Capua and Corinth, soon recovered all the advantages which can be separated from independent sovereignty. IV. The provinces of the East present the contrast of Roman magnificence with Turkish barbarism. The ruins of antiquity scattered over uncultivated fields and ascribed by ignorance to the power of magic scarcely afford a shelter to the oppressed peasant or wandering Arab. Under the reign of the Khazars, the proper Asia alone contained 500 populous cities, 79 enriched with all the gifts of nature and adorned with all the refinements of art. 11 cities of Asia had once disputed the honor of dedicating a temple of Tiberius, and their respective merits were examined by the Senate. 84 of them were immediately rejected as unequal to the burden, and among these was Laodicea, whose splendor is still displayed in its ruins. 81 Laodicea collected a very considerable revenue from its flocks of sheep, celebrated for the fineness of their wool, and had received, a little before the contest, a legacy of above £400,000 by the testament of a generous citizen. 82. If such was the poverty of Laodicea, what must have been the wealth of those cities whose claim appeared preferable, and particularly of Pergamus, of Smyrna, and of Ephesus, who so long disputed with each other the titular primacy of Asia? 83. The capitals of Syria and Egypt held a still superior rank in the empire. Antioch and Alexandria looked down with disdain on a crowd of dependent cities. 84. And yielded with reluctance to the majesty of Rome itself. 74. Return. Hist. Var. Lib. X. C. 16. He lived in the time of Alexander Severus. C. Fabricius Biblioth. Graeca. L. Iv. C. 21. 741. Return. This may in some degree account for the difficulty started by Livy as to the incredibly numerous armies raised by the small states around Rome, where, in his time, a scanty stock of free soldiers among a larger population of Roman slaves broke the solitude. Vix seminario exiguo militum relicto servicia Romana ab solitudine vindicant. Liv. VVE. Compare Appian Bel Civ. I7. M. Substi. 5. Return. Joseph. de Bell. Judd. I.e. 13. The number, however, is mentioned and should be received with a degree of latitude. Note, without doubt no reliance can be placed on this passage of Josephus. The historian makes Agrippa give advice to the Jews as to the power of the Romans, and the speech is full of declamation which can furnish no conclusions to history. While enumerating the nations subject to the Romans, he speaks of the Gauls as submitting to 100 soldiers, which is false, as there were 8 legions in Gaul. Tac. Iv. 5, while there are nearly 1,200 cities. G. Josephus infra places these 8 legions on the Rhine, as Tacitus does. Im 76. Return. Plin. Hist. Nactur. EE 5 to 77 to return. Plin. Hist. Nactur. EE 3 4 Ev 35. The list seems authentic and accurate. The division of the provinces and the different condition of the cities are minutely distinguished. Geograph. Eocrof, EXVI, P. Eoren 89, Joseph, G. Bell, Joseph, de Bell, Jude, EI 16, Philostrat, Inviti, Sophist, LIIP 58 Edit, Oliach 80 Return, City, Annal, E55. I have taken some pains in consulting and comparing modern travelers with regard to the fate of those 11 cities of Asia. 7 or 8 are totally destroyed. Hipap, Tralles, Laodicea, Huum, Halicarnassus, Miletus, Ephesus, and we may add Sardes. Of the remaining 3, Pergamus is a straggling village of 2,000 or 3,000 inhabitants, Magnesia, under the name of Guzelisar, a town of some consequence, and Smyrna, a great city, peopled by 100,000 souls. But even at Smyrna, while the Franks have maintained a commerce, the Turks have ruined the arts. 81. Return. See a very exact and pleasing description of the ruins of Laodicea in Chandler's Travels through Asia Minor P225 NCEO, Old Return Eng 225 NC. 82. Return. Strabo, LZI. P866. He had studied at Tralles. 83. Return. See a dissertation of M. de Bose, Mem. de l'Académie, Tom. Aristides pronounced a narration, which is still extant, to recommend concord to the rival cities. 84. Return. The inhabitants of Egypt, exclusive of Alexandria, amounted to 7.5 millions. Joseph, de Bell, Judd, II, 16. Under the military government of the Mamelukes, Syria was supposed to contain 60,000 villages. Histoire de Timur Bek, LVC 20. Chapter 2. The Internal Prosperity in the Age of the Antonines. Part 4. All these cities were connected with each other and with the capital by the public highways which, issuing from the Forum of Rome, traversed Italy, pervaded the provinces, and were terminated only by the frontiers of the empire. If we carefully trace the distance from the wall of Antoninus to Rome, and from thence to Jerusalem, it will be found that the great chain of communication from the northwest to the southeast point of the empire was drawn out to the length of 4,080 Roman miles. 85. The public roads were accurately divided by milestones and ran in a direct line from one city to another, with very little respect for the obstacles either of nature or private property. Mountains were perforated, and bold arches thrown over the broadest and most rapid streams. 86. The middle part of the road was raised into a terrace which commanded the adjacent country, consisted of several strata of sand, gravel, and cement, and was paved with large stones, or, in some places near the capital, with granite. 87. Such was the solid construction of the Roman highways, whose firmness has not entirely yielded to the effort of 15 centuries. They united the subjects of the most distant provinces by an easy and familiar intercourse, but their primary object had been to facilitate the marches of the legions, nor was any country considered as completely subdued till it had been rendered in all its parts pervious to the arms and authority of the conqueror. The advantage of receiving the earliest intelligence, and of conveying their orders with celerity, induced the emperors to establish, throughout their extensive dominions, the regular institution of posts. 88 houses were everywhere erected at the distance only of 5 or 6 miles. Each of them was constantly provided with 40 horses, and by the help of these relays it was easy to travel 100 miles in a day along the Roman roads. 89 to 1. The use of posts was allowed to those who claimed it by an imperial mandate, but though originally intended for the public service, it was sometimes indulged to the business or conveniency of private citizens. 90. Nor was the communication of the Roman Empire less free and open by sea than it was by land. The provinces surrounded and enclosed the Mediterranean, and Italy, in the shape of an immense promontory, advanced into the midst of that great lake. The coasts of Italy are, in general, destitute of safe harbors, but human industry had corrected the deficiencies of nature, and the artificial port of Ostia in particular, situated at the mouth of the Tiber, and formed by the Emperor Claudius, was a useful monument of Roman greatness. 91. From this port, which was only 16 miles from the capital, a favorable breeze frequently carried vessels in 7 days to the columns of Hercules, and in 9 or 10 to Alexandria in Egypt. 9285 return. The following itinerary may serve to convey some idea of the direction of the road and of the distance between the principal towns. I, from the wall of Antonines to York, 222 Roman miles. I.C., London, 227. 3. Rutupia, or Sandwich, 67. I.V., the navigation to Boulogne, 45. V. Rheims, 74. V. Imes, 330. V.I.Z., Milan, 3024. V.I.Z., Rome, 4226. I.Ents, Brundusium to Dyrrachium, 40. X.I., Byzantium, 711. 3. X30. X.I.Z., 33. 3030. 35. Antioch, 44. 35. 40 in. 50. Hinkeland, 45. English miles. See the itineraries published by Wesseling, his annotations quoting to Dyrrachium, DNV for Gaul and Italy. 86 Return Montfaucon, L'Antiquité expliquée, 24. P2 LIC5, has described the bridges of Narni, Alcantara, Nismis, and C87 Return Point Vive Romain, Lomi LII, CLL L28 1 VA L Romain, LII, CLL L28 1 Recopius in Hist, Arcana C30, Bergier Hist, Des Grands Chemiens LIV, Codex Theodosian, LVI, Tit VV Volu, II, P Phi 5 or 6 Phi 63 with Godefroy's learned commentary. In the time of Theodosius, Cassarius, a magistrate of high rank, went post from Antioch to Constantinople. He began his journey at night, was in Cappadocia 25 miles from Antioch the ensuing evening, and arrived at Constantinople the 6th day about noon. The whole distance was 725 Roman, or 665 English miles. See Libanius, Orat, XXI, and the Itineraria, p. 572 to 581. Note: a courier is mentioned in Walpole's Travels, II, 3035, who was to travel from Aleppo to Constantinople more than 700 miles in 8 days, an unusually short journey. M. Acts 891 Returner. Posts for the conveyance of intelligence were established by Augustus. Sweat, Org. 49. The couriers traveled with amazing speed. Blair on Roman slavery. Note, p. 261. It is probable that the posts from the time of Augustus were confined to the public service and supplied by impressment. Nerva, as it appears from a coin of his reign, made an important change. He established posts upon all the public roads of Italy and made the service chargeable upon his own exchequer. Hadrian, perceiving the advantage of this improvement, extended it to all the provinces of the empire. Cardwell on coins, p. 220. Mini return me. Mini triturn. Pliny, though a favorite and a minister, made an apology for granting post horses to his wife on the most urgent business. Epist. X21, 1 return Bigia. Hist isig aujourd'hui jouer si 49. Nici tu return bitritui pg. P. Shisi. In Prodeblench Town. Note, Pliny says Puteoli, which seems to have been the usual landing place from the east. See the voyages of St. Paul, Acts XVI, 13, and of Josephus, Vita ci. 30m. Whatever evils either reason or declamation have imputed to extensive empire, the power of Rome was attended with some beneficial consequences to mankind, and the same freedom of intercourse which extended the vices diffused likewise the improvements of social life. In the more remote ages of antiquity, the world was unequally divided. The East was in the immemorial possession of arts and luxury, whilst the West was inhabited by rude and warlike barbarians who either disdained agriculture or to whom it was totally unknown. Under the protection of an established government, the productions of happier climates and the industry of more civilized nations were gradually introduced into the western countries of Europe, and the natives were encouraged by an open and profitable commerce to multiply the former as well as to improve the latter. It would be almost impossible to enumerate all the articles, either of the animal or the vegetable reign, which were successively imported into Europe from Asia and Egypt. 93. But it will not be unworthy of the dignity, and much less of the utility, of an historical work, slightly to touch on a few of the principal heads. 1. Almost all the flowers, the herbs, and the fruits that grow in our European gardens are of foreign extraction, which, in many cases, is betrayed even by their names. The apple was a native of Italy, and when the Romans had tasted the richer flavor of the apricot, the peach, the pomegranate, the citron, and the orange, they contented themselves with applying to all these new fruits the common denomination of apple, discriminating them from each other by the additional epithet of their country. 2. In the time of Homer, the vine grew wild in the island of Sicily, and most probably in the adjacent continent, but it was not improved by the skill, nor did it afford a liquor grateful to the taste of the savage inhabitants. 94. 1,000 years afterwards, Italy could boast that of the 80 most generous and celebrated wines, more than 2/3 were produced from her soil. 95. The blessing was soon communicated to the Narbonese province of Gaul, but so intense was the cold to the north of the Cevennes that in the time of Strabo it was thought impossible to ripen the grapes in those parts of Gaul. 96. This difficulty, however, was gradually vanquished, and there is some reason to believe that the vineyards of Burgundy are as old as the age of the Antonines. 97. 3. The olive in the Western world followed the progress of peace, of which it was considered as the symbol. 2 centuries after the foundation of Rome, both Italy and Africa were strangers to that useful plant. It was naturalized in those countries, and at length carried into the heart of Spain and Gaul. The timid errors of the ancients, that it required a certain degree of heat and could only flourish in the neighborhood of the sea, were insensibly exploded by industry and experience. 4. The cultivation of flax was transported from Egypt to Gaul and enriched the whole country, however it might impoverish the particular lands on which it was sown. 99. 5. The use of artificial grasses became familiar to the farmers both of Italy and the provinces, particularly the Lucerne, which derived its name and origin from Media. 100. The assured supply of wholesome and plentiful food for the cattle during winter multiplied the number of the docks and herds, which in their turn contributed to the fertility of the soil. To all these improvements may be added an assiduous attention to mines and fisheries, which, by employing a multitude of laborious hands, serve to increase the pleasures of the rich and the subsistence of the poor. The elegant treatise of Columella describes the advanced state of the Spanish husbandry under the reign of Tiberius, and it may be observed that those famines which so frequently afflicted the infant republic were seldom or never experienced by the extensive empire of Rome. The accidental scarcity in any single province was immediately relieved by the plenty of its more fortunate neighbors. 93. Return. It is not improbable that the Greeks and Phoenicians introduced some new arts and productions into the neighborhood of Marseille and Gades. 94. Return. See Homer, Odys, Lix. V. 358, 95. Return. Plin, Hist, Nature, L. Sif, 96. Els Return. Strab, Geograph, Lif, p. 269. The intense cold of a Gallic winter was almost proverbial among the ancients. Else, note, Strabo only says that the grape does not ripen. Attempts had been made in the time of Augustus to naturalize the vine in the north of Gaul, but the cold was too great. Diod, Sic, edit. Rodom, p. 304. Diodorus, lib. 26, gives a curious picture of the Italian traders bartering with the savages of Gaul a cask of wine for a slave. M. It appears from the newly discovered treatise of Cicero de Republica that there was a law of the Republic prohibiting the culture of the vine and olive beyond the Alps in order to keep up the value of those in Italy. Nos justissimi homines, qui transalpinas gentes oleam et vitem serere non sinimus, quo pruris in nostra oliveta nostraque vinia. Lib. III. 9. The restrictive law of Domitian was veiled under the decent pretext of encouraging the cultivation of grain. Suete. Dom. V. It was repealed by Probus Voppus Strobus 18. IM. 97. Return. In the beginning of the 4th century, the orator Eumenius Panagyr, Vetter, vi. 6, edit. Delphin speaks of the vines in the territory of Autun, which were decayed through age, and the first plantation of which was totally unknown. The Pagus Arabrignus is supposed by M. D'Anville to be the district of Buny, celebrated even at present for one of the first growths of Burgundy. Note. This is proved by a passage of Pliny the Elder, where he speaks of a certain kind of grape Vitis piccata, Vinum piccatum, which grows naturally to the district of Vienne, and had recently been transplanted into the country of the Auvergne, Auvergne, of the Helvii, the Vivavias, and the Burgundy and Franche-Comté. Pliny wrote AD 77, Hist, Nat, Giv. 1, W99. Return. Plin, Hist, Natio, LE 6th, 100. A return. See the agreeable essays on agriculture by Mr. Hart, in which he has collected all that the ancients and moderns have said of Lucerne. Agriculture is the foundation of manufactures, since the productions of nature are the materials of art. Under the Roman Empire, the labor of an industrious and ingenious people was variously, but incessantly employed in the service of the rich. In their dress, their table, their houses, and their furniture, the favorites of fortune united every refinement of conveniency, of elegance, and of splendor, whatever could soothe their pride or gratify their sensuality. Such refinements, under the odious name of luxury, have been severely arraigned by the moralists of every age, and it might perhaps be more conducive to the virtue, as well as happiness, of mankind if all possessed the necessaries, and none the superfluities, of life. But in the present imperfect condition of society, luxury, though it may proceed from vice or folly, seems to be the only means that can correct the unequal distribution of property. The diligent mechanic and the skillful artist, who have obtained no share in the division of the earth, receive a voluntary tax from the possessors of land, and the latter are prompted by a sense of interest to improve those estates with whose produce they may purchase additional pleasures. This operation, the particular effects of which are felt in every society, acted with much more diffusive energy in the Roman world. The provinces would soon have been exhausted of their wealth if the manufactures and commerce of luxury had not insensibly restored to the industrious subjects the sums which were exacted from them by the arms and authority of Rome. As long as the circulation was confined within the bounds of the empire, it impressed the political machine with a new degree of activity, and its consequences, sometimes beneficial, could never become pernicious. But it is no easy task to confine luxury within the limits of an empire. The most remote countries of the ancient world were ransacked to supply the pomp and delicacy of Rome. The forests of Scythia afforded some valuable furs. Amber was brought overland from the shores of the Baltic to the Danube, and the barbarians were astonished at the price which they received in exchange for so useless a commodity. 1001. There was a considerable demand for Babylonian carpets and other manufactures of the East, but the most important and unpopular branch of foreign trade was carried on with Arabia and India. Every year, about the time of the summer solstice, a fleet of 120 vessels sailed from Myos Hormos, a port of Egypt on the Red Sea. By the periodical assistance of the monsoons, they traversed the ocean in about 40 days. The coast of Malabar, or the island of Ceylon, 102 was the usual term of their navigation, and it was in those markets that the merchants from the more remote countries of Asia expected their arrival. The return of the fleet of Egypt was fixed to the months of December or January, and as soon as their rich cargo had been transported on the backs of camels from the Red Sea to the Nile and had descended that river as far as Alexandria, it was poured without delay into the capital of the empire. 103. The objects of Oriental traffic were splendid and trifling. Silk, a pound of which was esteemed not inferior in value to a pound of gold. 104 precious stones, among which the pearl claimed the first rank after the diamond, 105, and a variety of aromatics that were consumed in religious worship and the pomp of funerals. The labor and risk of the voyage was rewarded with almost incredible profit. But the profit was made upon Roman subjects, and a few individuals were enriched at the expense of the public. As the natives of Arabia and India were contented with the productions and manufactures of their own country, silver, on the side of the Romans, was the principal, if not the only 51 instrument of commerce. It was a complaint worthy of the gravity of the Senate, that in the purchase of female ornaments, the wealth of the state was irrecoverably given away to foreign and hostile nations. 26. The annual loss is computed, by a writer of an inquisitive but censorious temper, at upwards of £800,000 sterling. 27. Such was the style of discontent, brooding over the dark prospect of approaching poverty. And yet if we compare the proportion between gold and silver as it stood in the time of Pliny and as it was fixed in the reign of Constantine, we shall discover within that period a very considerable increase. Number 28. There is not the least reason to suppose that gold was become more scarce. It is therefore evident that silver was grown more common, that whatever might be the amount of the Indian and Arabian exports, they were far from exhausting the wealth of the Roman world, and that the produce of the mines abundantly supplied the demands of commerce. Number 29. 29. C45. Plin. Hist. Nut. XXXXVI. The latter observed with some humor that even fashion had not yet found out the use of amber. Nero sent a Roman knight to purchase great quantities on the spot where it was produced, the coast of modern Prussia. The 1802 return, Tech Rebrona by the Romans, and Serendib by the Arabs. It was discovered under the reign of Claudius, and gradually became the principal mart of the East. Tech 1 and 3, the return Min, Plin, Hist, Naqua, LVU, Strabo, LXVE, Tech 1-4, return Hist, August, P. 224. A silk garment was considered as an ornament to a woman but as a disgrace to a man. Tech 1-5 to return. The two great pearl fisheries were the same as at present, Ormuz and Cape Comorin. As well as we can compare ancient with modern geography, Rome was supplied with diamonds from the mine of Jumelpur in Bengal, which is described in the Voyages de Tavernier, Tom, IIP 281, 1951, return. Certainly not the only one. The Indians were not so contented with regard to foreign productions. Arian has a long list of European wares, which they received in exchange for their own: Italian and other wines, brass, tin, lead, coral, chrysolith, storax, glass, dresses of one or many colors, zones, and sea. See Periplus Maris Erythrae in Hudson Geogra. Min, EP 27. W. The German translator observes that Gibbon has confined the use of aromatics to religious worship and funerals. His error seems the omission of other spices, of which the Romans must have consumed great quantities in their cookery. Wenck, however, admits that silver was the chief article of exchange. In 1787, a peasant near Nellore in the Carnatic struck, in digging, on the remains of a Hindu temple he found, also a pot which contained Roman coins and medals of the 2nd century, mostly Trajan's, Adrian's, and Faustinus, all of gold, many of them fresh and beautiful, others defaced or perforated, as if they had been worn as ornaments. Asiatic Researches, II 19, MW 26 return Tacit, Annal, IIW 50. In a speech of Tiberius, Astitine, turn, Plin, turn, Plin. In another place he computes half that sum. Quingentis HS for India exclusive of Arabia. 28 return, the proportion, which was 1 to 10 and 12 1 to 2, rose to 1425, the legal regulation of Constantine. See Arbuthnot's Tables of Ancient Coins, C5. Notwithstanding the propensity of mankind to exalt the past and to depreciate the present, the tranquil and prosperous state of the empire was warmly felt, and honestly confessed, by the provincials as well as Romans. They acknowledged that the true principles of social life, laws, agriculture, and science, which had been first invented by the wisdom of Athens, were now firmly established by the power of Rome, under whose auspicious influence the fiercest barbarians were united by an equal government and common language. They affirm that with the improvement of arts the human species were visibly multiplied. They celebrate the increasing splendor of the cities, the beautiful face of the country, cultivated and adorned like an immense garden, and the long festival of peace which was enjoyed by so many nations, forgetful of the ancient animosities and delivered from the apprehension of future danger. 9. Whatever suspicions may be suggested by the air of rhetoric and declamation which seems to prevail in these passages, the substance of them is perfectly agreeable to historic truth. 9 return. Among many other passages, see Pliny, Hist. Natur. II. 5. Aristides, De Urbe Roma, and Tertullian, De Anima, see Plen. 30. It was scarcely possible that the eyes of contemporaries should discover in the public felicity the latent causes of decay and corruption. This long peace and the uniform government of the Romans introduced a slow and secret poison into the vitals of the empire. The minds of men were gradually reduced to the same level, the fire of genius was extinguished, and even the military spirit evaporated. The natives of Europe were brave and robust. Spain, Gaul, Britain, and Illyricum supplied the legions with excellent soldiers and constituted the real strength of the monarchy. Their personal valor remained, but they no longer possessed that public courage which is nourished by the love of independence, the sense of national honor, the presence of danger, and the habit of command. They received laws and governors from the will of their sovereign, and trusted for their defense to a mercenary army. The posterity of their boldest leaders was contented with the rank of citizens and subjects. The most aspiring spirits resorted to the court or standard of the emperors, and the deserted provinces, deprived of political strength or union, insensibly sunk into the languid indifference of private life. The love of letters, almost inseparable from peace and refinement, was fashionable among the subjects of Hadrian and the Antonines, who were themselves men of learning and curiosity. It was diffused over the whole extent of their empire. The most northern tribes of Britons had acquired a taste for rhetoric. Homer, as well as Virgil, were transcribed and studied on the banks of the Rhine and Danube, and the most liberal rewards sought out the faintest glimmerings of literary merit. E9d. The sciences of physics and astronomy were successfully cultivated by the Greeks. The observations of Ptolemy and the writings of Galen are studied by those who have improved their discoveries and corrected their errors. But if we accept the inimitable Lucian, this age of indolence passed away without having produced a single writer of original genius, or who excelled in the arts of elegant composition. 191. The authority of Plato and Aristotle, of Zeno and Epicurus, still reigned in the schools, and their systems, transmitted with blind deference from one generation of disciples to another, precluded every generous attempt to exercise the powers or enlarge the limits of the human mind. The beauties of the poets and orators, instead of kindling a fire like their own, inspired only cold and servile imitations, or if any ventured to deviate from those models, they deviated at the same time from good sense and propriety. On the revival of letters, the youthful vigor of the imagination, after a long repose, national emulation, a new religion, new languages, and a new world, called forth the genius of Europe. But the provincials of Rome, trained by a uniform artificial foreign education, were engaged in a very unequal competition with those bold ancients who, by expressing their genuine feelings in their native tongue, had already occupied every place of honor. The name of poet was almost forgotten. That of orator was usurped by the sophists. A cloud of critics, of compilers, of commentators darkened the face of learning, and the decline of genius was soon followed by the corruption of taste. 110. Return. Herodes Atticus gave the sophist Polemo above £8,000 for 3 declamations. See Philostrat, lip. 538. The Antonines founded a school at Athens, in which professors of grammar, rhetoric, politics, and the 4 great sects of philosophy were maintained at the public expense for the instruction of youth. The salary of a philosopher was 10,000 drachma, between £300 and £400 a year. Similar establishments were formed in the other great cities of the empire. See Lucian in Eunuch, Tom, IIP 352, edit. Writes, Philostrat, LII, p56, Hist, August, p21, Dion Cassius, LLXXI, p1195, Juvenal himself, in a morose satire which in every line betrays his own disappointment and envy, is obliged, however, to say, O Juvenes, circumspicit et stimulad vos, materiamque sibi ducis indulgentia quarit. Satir. Vi. 20. Note, Vespasian first gave a salary to professor of rhetoric Greek and Roman Centina Sestertia. Sueton. In Vespet. 18. Hadrian and the Antonines, though still liberal, were less profuse. G. from W. Suetonius wrote Annua Centina L. 87, 5, 10. M1 other one return. This judgment is rather severe. Besides the physicians, astronomers, and grammarians, among whom there were some very distinguished men, there were still, under Hadrian, Suetonius, Florus, Plutarch, under the Antonines, Arrian, Pausanias, Appian, Marcus Aurelius himself, Sextus Empiricus, and c. Jurisprudence gained much by the labors of Salvius Julianus, Julius Celsus, Sex, Pomponius, Caius, and others. G. from W. Yet where among these is the writer of original genius, unless perhaps Plutarch, or even of a style really elegant? M. The sublime Longinus, who, in somewhat a later period and in the court of a Syrian queen, preserved the spirit of ancient Athens, observes and laments this degeneracy of his contemporaries, which debased their sentiments, enervated their courage, and depressed their talents. In the same manner, says he, as some children always remain pygmies whose infant limbs have been too closely confined, thus our tender minds, fettered by the prejudices and habits of a just servitude, are unable to expand themselves or to attain that well-proportioned greatness which we admire in the ancients, who, living under a popular government, wrote with the same freedom as they acted. Eliander 1. This diminutive stature of mankind, if we pursue the metaphor, was daily sinking below the old standard, and the Roman world was indeed peopled by a race of pygmies when the fierce giants of the north broke in and mended the puny breed. They restored a manly spirit of freedom, and after the revolution of 10 centuries, freedom became the happy parent of taste and science. 101 Return, Elongen, de Sublime, C44, P229, edit. Toll. Here too we may say of Longinus, his own example strengthens all his laws. Instead of proposing his sentiments with a manly boldness, he insinuates them with the most guarded caution, puts them into the mouth of a friend, and as far as we can collect from a corrupted text, makes a show of refuting them himself.